Hello everyone and welcome to this TELedvisors webinar. Today we're looking at learning technologists, what they actually do. What do they know? What do they do? What's the difference between edtechs and learning designers? How do we work together? How do we find the best people for the job? Today we're joined by, well, myself, Colin Simpson, Kim Schutz from University of Adelaide, Joe Hayes from Monash University, and Elaine Huber from the University of Sydney. So I'm Colin Simpson. I've worked in this field since 2003 when I started working at the Canberra Institute of Technology, which is a TAFE. It's basically been a combination of learning design, learning technology, and academic developer roles for me. I've also worked at ANU, currently at Swinburne, and I'm just about to start a new job at Monash, which is quite exciting. So I thought what I'd do to kick us off is to just have a quick little look at what the research literature has to say about learning technologists. I'm also in the middle of a PhD where I'm trying to look at Edvisor roles, so learning designers, learning technologists, academic developers and the like, and how we work collaboratively with academics and institutional management. So what I'm going to try and cover today is what we do and some of what we know according to the research. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that we could delve into relating to accreditation, training, how learning technology units are structured, where they sit, but we might save that for another time. The role of a learning technologist appears in the literature going back to the 1970s. Lawless and Kirkwood in 76 and Harris in 77 first used the term. It may appear earlier. Those were the oldest ones that I was able to find. I just quite liked this as terminology. So Joan Everline from UWA had this book, Ivory Basement Leadership, and it's basically, you know, sort of professional staff and people in, let's say, underappreciated roles in the institution. She described as working in the ivory basement. So what do learning technologists do? It's pretty globally accepted that a big chunk of our work is implementing, managing, and supporting educational technology. I don't think we're going to find any significant disagreement about that, and it's kind of built into the title. But there's a lot of different pieces to that puzzle. So I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. So if you've got any comments or questions, please feel free to pipe up. All of these slides I'll make available after the presentation as well. So if we sort of start to unpack what implement, manage and support educational technology looks like, a good part of that is actually finding the best tools to address learning and teaching and institutional needs. And I think it is worth separating those things because this is one of the points where, you know, we're often faced with sort of conflicting agendas. There was a really nice quote that came out of Cornell and Cornell in 2013. They did some interviews with a bunch of ed techs, and the quote was, "But the EdTech Pro doesn't just know what's new. He or she knows what works for which audiences, when it's appropriate and when it's not. The EdTech Pro knows when to say, you don't need an app, you need a 3x5 inch laminated card." So the other part of this kind of early stage is the evaluation of tools that we do. And that sort of flows a little bit of research, which I found interesting. So a lot of the literature out there seems to be of the opinion that learning technologists are engaged in research practice in some way or another, often, you know, related to the evaluation of learning technologists. Now, having worked as a professional staff member, I'm not so sure that this is the case, but I think it's quite interesting that this is the perception. Now, that said, there's a little bit of to and fro about what this research actually looks like. So Beetham talks about academic-related or professional educational technologists are often research active, which can contribute to credibility, knowledge, and revenue. And then Regalith and Chelman talk about, while many educational technologists are research active, the majority of the research they produce focuses upon evaluating products and projects rather than presenting reflections upon methodologies for development and evaluation that can be reused within the profession to build a core of knowledge. So there's a sense that we're doing research, but within a fairly limited kind of field. And they have lots of helpful suggestions for how we might do different research. Now, this was interesting. So in my experience as a learning technologist, I feel that we actually do engage with vendors a fair bit. Often that's unsolicited approaches, people wanting to sell us things and us sort of having to manage that, or, being told by senior executives, hey, I like this product, please go and talk to them and find out about it. That wasn't really something that appeared in the literature a whole lot. Oliver and Tattersall kind of loosely touched on it, but broadly speaking, I wouldn't say that working with vendors was seen as a big part of what we actually do. Working with IT to make technology available and to make changes to it as needed is certainly something that is recognised. I think there's certainly a lot more room for discussion about this, and we've got Joe Hayes who will be talking about this shortly. There was an interesting point raised about how learning technologists basically can act as a bridge between IT and academics. Sherville, Brown and Whitaker talk about hence an institutional educational technology service can bring expertise in local academic processes and ICT to liaise with other departments who may have less expertise in these processes, such as management information services, to ensure that the educational data is accurate and secure. Now, I think what they're really getting at is we have an understanding of the learning and teaching needs and some of the peculiar organisational needs within different teams, and we're able to act as intermediaries. And also try and help people to understand what some of the limitations, or what some of the requirements of the IT units are. And from a personal perspective, I've always found it. See, previously I was in a college-based team, and I had a lot of great ideas, and it was just like, well, that'd just be really easy. Just turn this thing on. Why can't IT do this thing? So since I've been working in a central unit and have a much deeper understanding of the relationship that we have with IT and the other work that they've got to do and all of the moving parts involved, it's actually been really useful being able to go back and talk to academics and say, well, you can have this thing, but we've got to do A, B, and C before that actually happens. And there's actually like 50,000 other things on the to-do list. So let's work out how we can start to make some priorities. Another big part of implementing, managing, and supporting educational technology is actually being part of the change management process in the institution. There's a couple of points that were interesting that were kind of raised in there. Keegan et al. From 2007 were talking about when institutions go through these processes and they don't have senior e-learning people involved at the high-level discussions, everything just takes forever. And then Brown in 2003 was talking about how learning text can also communicate staff concerns about flexible learning to senior management as part of introducing and embedding TEL-mediated flexible learning via careful change and communications management. Obviously, another big part of the work that we do is providing training and developing support resources. I don't think there's any controversy or any question about that. Sorry, I'm kind of rushing you people through these slides, which are quite, these images, which are quite magnificent. So I'll just give you a moment to look at our little thought leader slide. As I say, I'll make these slides available later. Now, one of the interesting things that came up quite frequently in the literature was this perception that learning technologists actually do learning and instructional design. As you can see, all the way from Seals and Ritchie in '94 up to Ritzhaupt, Martin, Pastor and Kang in 2018, that's been a recurring theme, which, yeah, certainly pricked up my ears, because one of the big discussions that we've found has been in this kind of pedagogy technology spectrum, and whether there's a hierarchy of knowledge and whether perhaps learning technologists are undervalued because they're perceived as not having this pedagogical understanding, whereas the research suggests that that's certainly work that is actually going on. Now, some of the other things that came up that I found interesting, let's say, certainly quite a few people feel that learning technologists will develop technologies. I haven't been involved in that myself, but I think that would be fun. Estates management for technology-rich learning spaces. I think that is actually something that is growing, because yeah, like the use of spaces is actually really significant. There's so much going on in the chat, but I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to kind of plow through here. Well, now this was interesting. Training and technical support for e-research and virtual research environments. In my experience, again, we tend not to sort of provide a lot of support for research, although there's certainly a lot of interest in that. This guy Tattersall's basically said maybe what we need is research technologists, which was fantastic, and his sort of argument was learning technologists have been incredibly successful, so you know these concepts need to be moved across. And ecological auditing, I don't know what that is. Maybe something to do with the space. Anyway, that was just interesting that these are some of the other things that some researchers feel that learning techs do. I'm going to quickly step you through the work that Ritzhaupt and company have been doing over the last 9 years, because this is really interesting for me in terms of looking at what learning technologists know and what expected of them. By way of summary, what they've been doing is looking at the requirements that have been identified in job ads for learning technologists, and then also interviews with learning technologists about what they're actually what they think is significant. So we can skip through and we can see on the left is what is identified in the job ads. On the right is what the learning technologists thought was significant. Again, I'll share these slides later. And over the publications, they've basically tweaked these instruments using statistics and magic to pin down what people found was actually really useful. So it's fantastic to get a sense of how perceptions of the skills necessary for learning technologists have evolved. And I've just got like a little slide here that shows what was prioritised in 2010 and what's kind of prioritised last year. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of references there. Again, I'll give credit to this guy, Laurie, who put those images together. And I've been given the wind-up. So that's pretty much it. So that's loosely what I've found people think learning technologists do in the literature.